Türkei kommen möchte ich.
Before we move on to Turkey, I wanted to give you, Madam, an opportunity for a brief statement.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to present a very sensitive and humanitarian issue which came to my attention just last night. As maybe you know, it was a big publication into the Turkish press, recent tremendous interest to the public opinion, that 38 skeletons were discovered into the prisons of Diyarbakir during on an ordinary renovation process, and all the skulls of these of the remnants have an opening of a bullet of 9mm revolver bullet, which is pretty similar with the way we discovered the skulls in Cyprus in massive graves. These remnants were checked and controlled and by DNA investigation process, and it was realized that they have nothing to do with missing people from the Kurdish or Turkish population. So I'm asking the support of the committee and the European Parliament in order to the scientific bodies of Cyprus to have access to these remnants, because hundreds of families are living in an anxiety in Cyprus right now, because according to information, more than 200 people were in prison in Diyarbakir after the 1974 war. Thank you, Chair.
Herzlichen Dank.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Theoharous. Can I suggest that we turn to the Turkish embassy, the ambassador? Perhaps we can discuss this with the rapporteur later on to see exactly what we can do here. Thank you very much, Mrs. Theoharous, for that. We now move on to the next item on the agenda, which is Turkey. Our rapporteur is Mrs. Oomen-Ruijten, and you have the floor, madam. Thank you very much, Chairman. Chairman, on the 12th of January, in this committee, I presented the draft report on the progress report. And at the time, I indicated that I felt the views of the European Commission and indeed the Council were quite right, and that I felt like them that Turkey occupied a key position for peace and security in Europe. And in my draft resolution, I talk about the interdependence between Turkey and the European Union. And I have done this with an eye to the potential for economic growth in Turkey. I've done that given the relevance of Turkey in terms of energy supplies, our energy supplies, and also the potential synergies which exist between the EU's external policy and Turkey. Now, when I talk about interdependence, Mr. Chairman, I think that has engendered positive results both for the EU and for Turkey, for that matter. However, that's only possible if there is a mutual dedication, a mutual input. So this cuts both ways. Both the EU and Turkey have got to do all they can to make sure that this reciprocal engagement is a reality. So we have to get practical progress in the reform process in Turkey. And more than that, we have to have an improvement of their relations with their neighbours. And I would look to the European Union and the Member States and to produce support for the new agenda for Commissioner Füle in the relationship between the EU and Turkey. But I also expect redoubled efforts in terms of creating conditions whereby certain chapters can have some forward movement again and can get progress again. Of course, in human rights areas, there is much that still remains to be done. Mr. Chairman, in the context of external policy, foreign policy and combating terrorism, I think that if we cooperate more intensively together, then there is much that we can achieve. both for us in the European Union and for Turkey. In January, Mr. Chairman, I expressed my deep concern about freedom of expression in Turkey, press freedoms, the long period of preventive custody, the large number of arrests of journalists, politicians and human rights defenders. Now, that was a message which enjoyed the support of colleagues in January, and I'm grateful to them for that. I think that there is agreement, there is consensus here, that now more than ever before, it is of the essence that we are robust and balanced, but also objective in the messages and the signals that we send out to Turkey. We need to send out a message which they can actually act on and which they can implement. I don't think we need to go into all of the details. I don't think that I should simply throw everything in which people have said to me into the resolution, because this would simply be much the same as last time. It would become a portmanteau thing, which wouldn't change very much from one year to the next, and that, I think, is not the purpose of the exercise. We had the discussion, the debate, the resolution in January. We had the 461 amendments. Now, I can work with the shadow rapporteurs in Strasbourg to get compromise amendments. Can I thank colleagues for the very effective and constructive cooperation which we have had. We now have 29 compromise amendments, thanks to the best efforts of Lucas. They were circulated late on Monday evening. So the compromise amendments really encompass the central points here, the key elements. Now, I've mentioned the legislation on terrorism, the number of people who are in preventive custody. Now, the reason I've mentioned that is because we need to say where the difficulties are. And that's exactly what we've tried to do in the compromises. We are a bit more specific in the anti-terrorism legislation and in the criminal code as well, the penal code. Because there you get definitions which have been subject to far too wide an interpretation. So we have drawn up a list of specific articles from the criminal code and from the anti-terrorism legislation which need to be revised. Another point which came up time and again in the course of our discussions was the relationship between the government on the one hand and the opposition on the other. The point which I've made with colleagues in the compromise amendments is how important it is to get dialogue between the government and the opposition, and to make sure that they are able to cooperate in a spirit of cooperation. We explain concern about cases which are pending before the courts against members of the Turkish Parliament and members of the biggest opposition party. When we're talking about the representatives of the people, they cannot work with the prospect of legal prosecution hanging over them, because then democracy and freedom of expression are impossible, and we've worked very hard to cover those points as well. Chairman, another area which was Hrant Dink, because the judgment was very disappointing. There is a legal case concerning the journalist Hrant Dink, who was slain, murdered, and that, I think, is essential, an important case for the rule of law and for openness in Turkey. And so this is an opportunity for us, like last year, to come back and say how important it is that there's a proper investigation into the killing of Hrant Dink. I think that all of us have a responsibility to make sure that this is taken to the courts and is not simply kicked into the long grass. Therefore, Mr. Chairman, those are the big points. There are one or two cases of fine-tuning in the text. We need to keep up the discussion with the Turks on the free trade agreement, which we're signing with them. the announced reforms of the Ministry of Justice. This must be regarded as the first step in the right direction, and we hope that we call on the Commission to consider measures which are needed to open Chapter 24 of the negotiations. Chairman, I don't intend to go through every thing blow by blow. What I would say is that if you go through the compromise amendments, then I think colleagues will find much to commend them. Now, moving on to Cyprus. This is one point where it was not possible to draw up a compromise amendment. Now, why is that the case? Quite simply because the text in the draft resolution is objective. But more than that, it's a very robust one, and it does convey in crystal clear terms what our message is for the relationship between Turkey and Cyprus. Now, I would put this question to colleagues. I know you have got amendments down. And the question is, you can have them voted on or you can withdraw them. But I think that the text is going to remain as it is. And as I've tried to outline its advantages. So, in conclusion, Chairman, just to thank everyone for their contributions. I hope we get a good vote tomorrow. This is a resolution now which packs a punch, which is clear and has the virtue of objectivity. And I hope that I'll still be able to claim that tomorrow once the vote has taken place. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, our Rapporteur, Ria Oomen-Ruijten, for really outstanding work. Indeed, her report is quite balanced and positive, as is the positive agenda proposed by Commissioner Fula to move forward with Turkey. I must say, I think that my own group has contributed substantively in the amendments that were made and in the negotiations with Ria to this balanced outcome, and that's definitely what we want to achieve. We think this will be appropriate for the importance of EU's relations with Turkey at a moment where Turkey is more than ever playing a very relevant role behind our region, with very positive implications, but where there are also new challenges, and from July we will have a Cypriot presidency of the European Union. I'm sure this will require extremely discernment, enlightenment, I would say, from all sides, and definitely from the Turkish side on how to conduct the relations with the EU and in this process towards the accession. We believe that it's very important, the call in the report for the opening of new chapters 23 and 24, and also the very incisive language that we were able to agree, referring the most important problems that we see, namely in the judiciary, and of course the cases that have been highlighted are very relevant, and of course in the lack or in the problems regarding the freedom of expression and plurality in the media. And again, the case of Andring is indeed a seminal one, so to say, in the negative sense, but hopefully helping correct what is definitely wrong. Of course, the other thing that also concerns very much my own group is the abusive use of anti-terror legislation to curb on people who are either in the opposition or express their free opinions in different ways. In what concerns Cyprus, I think my group will want a balanced outcome and will facilitate that outcome. And I must just recall that in this respect we were yesterday with a representative of the Council, and I asked him about the proposed conference, that the conference on Syria that Turkey is planning to organize, and whether this would entail an invitation to Cyprus as part, of course, of the EU. And I was reassured by the answer that I got, the assumption that the Council has. I think this will be a matter that will come up definitely, hopefully, positively in the coming report. Thank you again to our rapporteur, to all the colleagues, including from my own group, and namely, let me mention Raymond Obiozo, who is our shadow, who could not be here today because he's ill, but who asked me to point out the points. Thank you.
Ja, vielen Dank, Herr Vorsitzender.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I'd also like to thank Mrs. Oomen-Ruijten for the excellent work she's done. For some months now, about a year, we've reached an agreement, I think, here that we have a paradoxical situation. The fact that we're conducting accession talks with Turkey, which is positive, has meant that we've walked into difficulties in other areas, especially in the strategic dialogue on foreign policy. So I think it's good that we're moving into a positive ground, which is not just fixated on the accession process, which makes other work or other cooperation more difficult. The report contains two important messages. One is a critical issue, which is very important for our group, and that's human rights, basic freedoms and the rule of law. Here, Turkey, as an accession candidate, should show willingness to adopt European standards and take practical steps to making progress in that area. We can also see, as the Commission has already said, that in certain areas of activity there has been a deterioration of the situation. For example, the arrest of dozens of journalists in September is not acceptable, nor is the high number of journalists now in jail. In the past, we welcomed the government's more open attitude to the Kurds. However, that situation has now become negative. If we're going to achieve a peaceful solution to the Kurdish situation in Turkey, all sides are going to have to work on this. We've had journalists arrested. We have stonings, fires set. We have had people, journalists from Turkey in Zurich and England put under pressure. The thing is, as Mrs. Oomen-Ruijten said, if there's going to be a peaceful solution, there has to be freedom of expression for everybody. Another conclusion, or another observation I could make, is that the judicial system does not meet European Union standards. The Gennigan case is cause for concern, and there I would recommend everybody to look at compromise amendment number 11, because we want a better analysis of what is going on by the Commission. The Commission's analysis at the moment is very superficial. The Commission has been saying if you try to analyse the judicial system in detail in Turkey, you're standing in for that judicial system. Well, that's not true. And secondly, the constitutional process. Looking at the drafting of the new constitution, it's well on its way in the Turkish Parliament. However, we also have to pay attention to the amendments of the constitution concluded in 2010. And there I would draw attention to compromise amendment number 5. There we do need a closer observation process of the constitutional machinations in the Turkish parliament. A number of parties in Turkey are very concerned about the way the process is going in parliament. Now, we all agreed that chapters 23 and 24 should be opened as soon as possible. We want a positive agenda. We would also stress the strategic role of Turkey in the region. This is very important. The strategic dialogue has to continue, so I'm pleased that we have a representative from the EEAS here today. This will demonstrate to our Turkish friends how important we regard the strategic foreign policy dialogue. Finally, it's important that we in the Parliament make a positive contribution to the process. We should encourage liberalisation of visa issue, for example, but there is progress being made in this area. So I hope that this new positive agenda will lead to a more positive atmosphere between the EU and Turkey. Thank you. Mr. Lambsdorff, as regards what you said about the Commission's analysis, I will support you in that and call on the Commission to listen to what you said. A rigorous analysis of the situation is, and the judicial arrangements in Turkey is necessary by the European Commission. Mrs. Flotre. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mrs. Oomen-Ruijten. I think the work you have done in preparation for the vote tomorrow is very useful. You've done a very precise and important piece of work. Occasionally you're very critical, but constructively critical, calling on the Turkish authorities to overcome the difficulties they have to overcome. For example, with respect to the successive reform packages for the judiciary, making progress on freedom of expression. Your criticisms are precise and targeted, and I think they will encourage the Turkish authorities, because in your criticisms you are pointing the way forward towards progress, which track should be followed in terms of progress and reform, in terms of drafting a new constitution, in terms of reforming the penal code, and in terms of reforming the anti-terrorist legislation. So yours is a good piece of work, Mrs. Oomen-Ruijten, because it also reminds us of our responsibilities as Europeans. If we want the prospect of European Union membership to be a motor for reform in Turkey, it's absolutely important and indispensable indeed for us on the European side to be able to push forward with the opening of, for example, Chapter 24 on fundamental rights and justice. So I think the general approach here is good, and what we have here is a report which is complementary to the strategy adopted by the European Commission to adopt a positive agenda. That's to say, this is an encouraging report, and it is expressing confidence that certain reforms can be carried out in Turkey, leading to greater democratisation. Very encouraging. So I think this is a very good piece of work by Mrs. Oomen-Ruijten. Now, I've tabled an amendment with a number of colleagues, hasn't become one of the compromise amendments, saying that we are concerned about the environmental impact and the archaeological environmental impact of the way development goes ahead in Turkey. Development is a good thing, yes, but don't forget the way you develop can have an impact on the environment. There is a risk that the way Turkey is developing, that the excellent environmental conditions in the country could be undermined. So it's very important that we say this all together to the Turks, and we have an opportunity when it comes to voting on the amendments, especially my amendment 70. Now, as regards the situation of journalists and in particular the assassination of Mr. Andringt, it is important, first of all, to draw attention to the fact that this has happened. We shouldn't forget that the Turkish presidency has now drawn up a report on this which says that the officials who were responsible for the murder of Mr. Unding, directly or indirectly because of their inaction, have not been called to book, have not been disciplined, have not been investigated. And as long as this is the case, the Turkish judicial system will be regarded as weak. Now, I believe if we mention this in the report, there may well be judicial consequences. We could be encouraging action to be taken in Turkey with respect to the murder of Mr. Unding. So I'd like to thank the rapporteur for her report, and I look forward to voting on this report tomorrow, because I think it's going to be very useful for our future work with Turkey. Thank you. Thank you. Mr. van Olden, please.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Well, I too would like to congratulate Ria. This is a very difficult and controversial area, as we all know, and I think Ria has dealt with it in a very encouraging way. Inevitably, there are many quibbles and indeed some areas of substantive disagreement, but I think overall we can be supportive. It's most important that we see progress in terms of the relationship with Turkey, and that we send positive signals. We should recognise, I think, that progress with Turkey is as much in our interests as it is in Turkey's. On one or two specific points, and I have to say, those that seek to participate fully in the democratic process in Turkey should renounce violence. I think we need to be very clear on this, and I refer particularly to the front organisations and apologists for PKK terrorists. On the Cyprus issue, inevitably very controversial, but there needs to be compromise by all parties. We shouldn't expect that the Turkish side continues to be pressed to make concessions when nothing is received in return. But overall, Mr. Chairman, I think this is a good report, and we can be helpful there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and Mrs. Oomen-Ruijten for all the work she's put into this. Now, some members of us, as members of the Joint Parliamentary Committee for Turkey, went to Turkey on a visit, and we were able to talk to people from the NGOs and from civil society, and they told us about the fact that more than 100 journalists had been put in prison. Many hundreds of people from the Kurdish movements had been put in prison because they were associated with the KCK, which it was claimed to be an arm of the PKK. And the picture which we came away with, certainly in that part of our discussions, was one of a Turkey which is having difficulty in finding its way towards greater democracy. On the Kurdish issue, basically nothing is happening. No progress at all. And the European Union and indeed the European Parliament are simply monitoring developments, but we're not doing anything to pressurise the Turks in an area which is having an impact on hundreds of thousands of people. Now, on the question of the opening of chapters 23 and 24, we are not against the move towards European integration on the part of Turkey. However, I put this point to Mr. Bash. I said, what will Turkey do in the event of the Cyprus presidency, should they put on the agenda the whole question of opening up certain chapters of negotiations? Can I remind everyone that Mr. Bash, the negotiator, was not talking about opening up any chapters during the Cyprus presidency. And what this means then is that they're refusing to go down that path. They're not looking for pathways of communication with Cyprus. And I think this is something that we should condemn. We must tell Turkey that it's not possible a priori to close the door on the opening of communications with Cyprus. And this is something, of course, which many colleagues want to see. So it really is a bit much if they give us that kind of response through Mr. Bash. And I think that we have got to support. In this report, we've got to call on Turkey loud and clear to withdraw their troops from their armed forces from Cyprus. They have nothing to lose if they withdraw their army, their troops from Cyprus. Nothing whatsoever to lose. And that, I think, is what a candidate country should be doing. And I think also we should look at the UN resolutions on the question of Famagusta. And also remember that we have adopted a resolution on the subject which had very broad support from colleagues as well. Now there is an amendment down which deals with Famagusta. And that's Amendment 415. And this makes reference to the UN resolution and Famagusta and talks about the Erkan International Airport of Nicosia. Now, let's not delude ourselves about what the UN resolution talks about. It is confined to Famagusta. It does not stray into other areas. It's about to keep clear in our minds what the content of the resolution is. Now, on the question of the exclusive economic zone of Cyprus, they have signed up to the law of the sea. Turkey has not signed up to the law of the sea. Turkey, only 2 weeks ago, through their foreign minister, made a public utterance saying that foreign companies should not engage in the extraction of minerals off Cyprus because this was going to give rise to tensions. Now I believe that this Parliament should express its confidence that Turkey can be taken into membership of the European Union, but remind them that they've got duties, but they have obligations which they have to deliver as well. Thank you very much.
Now, we have a speakers list which will take us into this afternoon on this issue. It's that long. So, therefore, after the Shadow Rapporteurs have spoken, I'll ask you all to just speak for 1.5 minutes, please, if you will agree. Mr. Duff, I'm sure, will prove that's possible. Mr. Duff has the floor.
Well, Mr. President, I'll try. Two conclusions from the joint parliamentary committee meeting that we had in Istanbul last week. The first is that the constitutional process is more pluralistic and more sophisticated than we had suspected. And it's clearly the key to everything else that is going to happen in Turkey and between Turkey and its neighbours. And so it is essential that we follow up and scrutinise and are fully briefed upon the progress of this process. And Mr. Cicek, the President of the Grand National Assembly, who chairs the committee that's drafting the Constitution, is certainly receptive to the idea that members of the European Parliament play a part and that's good, and we should. The second point concerning Cyprus, I agree that the prospect of Turkey making concessions on Cyprus at present is nil, so the ball falls firmly in the court of the government of the Republic of Cyprus. And my own feeling is that the Cypriot presidency of the Council ought to call the bluff of the Turks, to challenge them by a willingness to progress the opening of chapters 23 and 24. I think that this is the only way that the paralysis on the Cypriot question can be relieved. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Ik wil beginnen met het bedanken van...
Emin Bozkurt. Thank you very much. Can I thank, first of all, can I thank Ria Oomen-Ruijten, because like no one else, I think, she has understood that it's necessary to look at this from both points of view, and that this is a very important thing with the Commission, because we now have a positive agenda. And I think that going forward, this is going to be very important in our relations with Turkey, because we in Europe have to work together with Turkey in order to see that those reforms take place. Women's rights are one of the areas where there's a need for progress. I was in Turkey last week, and things like human rights, judiciary reforms, law reforms, women's rights, these are very much part of the picture. So when we talk about human rights and freedom of expression, if we want to do something about the misuse of the anti-terror law, then I think we'll have to work together with Turkey to see the way ahead. And I think that chapters 23 and 24 need to be looked at to make sure that we can get changes made which will be genuine reforms. So I see a role here for us to play. And finally, can I just, since we've been talking about Cyprus, can I express the hope, which is that there is the political will on all sides to get progress. And perhaps this is something which, this will be an incentive to the Cyprus presidency to find a solution. Thank you.
Thank you, President. Θα ήθελα να αναφερθώ στο κυπριακό πρόβλημα.
Thank you, Chairman. On the question of Cyprus, can I say that at this time, and in fact thinking back over the past year, what we've seen on the side of Turkey when it comes to finding a solution to the Cyprus problem has been real aggressiveness, a very robust aggressiveness on their part, on their side. They have simply reiterated their political position, and they, I think, are looking at the forthcoming Cyprus presidency of Council. I think there is also a problem now about the exclusive economic zone as well. But despite all of that, Mrs. Oomen-Ruijten has been able to produce a document which is conciliatory. I think that she's been able to find common ground with all the political groups. And I would, at this point, urge Mrs. Oomen-Ruijten to come up with a compromise resolution which has to do with the continued settlements on Cyprus. Because the fact is that there are Turkish settlers in the occupied part of the island in very substantial numbers, and this poses a real threat to the finding of a solution. if the settlers from Turkey remain in the north of the island in those numbers, that's going to make life very difficult. And I've put down an amendment which I think has the support of Mrs. Oomen-Ruijten, and it calls on Turkey to stop this whole process of the illegal settlement of the occupied part of Cyprus. This, I think, is a proactive policy that we can do because at present it's moving away from a solution and not towards a solution. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I'll be brief and not repeat the other people's praise for the rapporteur. I want to make a few points. One is on the Kurdish issue. I think Mrs. Oomen-Ruijten has made a good compromise on paragraph 22 on the recognition and political solution for the Kurdish issue. But I would have liked her to do something in relation to paragraph 33 on the abuse of the anti-terrorism laws, which other people have mentioned, and there's a series of amendments from ALDE and other groups, 394 to 398, which I'd ask her to look at, because what is happening in all these hundreds, if not thousands of arrests is an abuse of anti-terrorism law. And while I agree with Geoffrey Van Orden, you can get front organisations, but the fact is there is no political space being created for legitimate and elected Kurdish politicians to come into the political mainstream. If you keep just criminalising people who raise the Kurdish issue and using anti-terrorism laws against them, you will never ever move towards a political solution. Secondly, on Cyprus, I don't agree that Mrs. Oomen-Ruijten is balanced. I think changes are needed to paragraph 25. In particular, and not least, to recognise the EU's broken promise from 2004 when it promised direct trade and other measures to end the isolation of the Turkish Cypriots. And that is a running sore which will not go away. But also I agree with what Andrew Duff said on Cyprus. I'm very pleased that Mrs. Oomen-Ruijten has picked up the variety of amendments that were put down on paragraph 34 to mention a roadmap to visa liberalisation, because that is the goal, and I'm glad that she's clearly stating that. And lastly, just to welcome paragraph 20 on LGBT rights.
Thank you very much. Please try and keep an eye on the time, everybody. Otherwise, we won't manage to fit in the next agenda item. Serbia is coming up, all right? Mr. Peitela.
Hvala lepa. Pridružujem se čestitkam kolegici poročevalki.
Thank you, Chairman. I would also like to congratulate the rapporteur on the piece of work she's done. I don't think we've ever had such a precise report which has dealt with such critical issues so clearly, beginning with freedom of expression and the press. But the report doesn't just deal with progress, of course. It calls for further progress. And here it's very important for us to support the constitutional process by explicitly calling for an opening of the judiciary chapter. There we need dialogue, and we need proposals to be made for a clear timetable for these negotiations. This is what the report calls for, and therefore it sends very clear signals. Now, one or two general comments. It's very important that in Turkey there is an open process of constitutional reform and an open process for the reform of the judiciary. Now, in recent months the opposition has been in much closer communication and dialogue with the European Commission, which is a good thing. And I think it's important for us to listen to all sides in this process and avoid any slowing down of the process. Thank you.
Ще бъда много кратък. Thank you, Chairman. I'll be very brief. I wish to congratulate the rapporteur for having tried to come up with a very convincing and balanced report. There are many positive elements in the report. This is the first time that the Council is called upon to give the Commission a mandate for starting a dialogue on visa liberalisation with the only country which has a candidate country status and still requires visas for the EU. I think that this will help boost trade, and it will also improve contacts between people. It is unacceptable that citizens of a candidate country cannot travel freely. I agree with Mrs. Ludford and Mr. Duff about the Cyprus issue. I'm not sure the report is very balanced there. I think that we need to focus on the commitment of the EU to live up to its promise from April 2004 to put an end to the isolation of the Turkish Cypriot community and to achieve a full solution on the Cyprus issue before the forthcoming presidency of Cyprus, because a presidency without the full-fledged participation of the Cypriot Turks will not be very meaningful. Thank you very much, and I wish you success.
I'd also like to congratulate the rapporteur for this balanced, objective and constructive report. The report recognizes progress achieved in Turkey, such as the organization of last year's elections. It refers to the possibilities, opportunities for drafting a new constitution. And then it refers to the justice system, and there is criticism, freedom of the press as well, that's criticized. Now I'd like to refer specifically to the Cyprus question. I think that the report is an extremely balanced one. It's balanced between the Turkish and Cyprus positions. For Turkey, it is counterproductive not to deal with a country that has the presidency of the European Union. It's an opportunity to discuss and to resolve the Cyprus problem and resolve the Cyprus-Turkey relationship and the Turkey-EU relationship. The report refers to the strategic, political and geographical importance of Turkey. It is quite right to call on Turkey to make possible dialogue between the EU and NATO. It calls on the Republic of Cyprus to lift its veto on Turkish participation in the European Defence Agency. In other words, the problems in the Middle East, issues to do with the Western Balkans, Pakistan, Iran, all this requires close cooperation between the European Union and Turkey. And I think that the outstanding problem that is Cyprus should not get in the way. On the contrary, the European Union and Turkey should take a constructive line and help both communities in Turkey and says the Speaker, and the United Nations to continue and complete the talks that are underway. You were 78% over speaking time there, Mr. Rocek. Colleagues, I have to tell you that we need to be a bit more responsible. I don't like to switch people off, but it might come to that because we really do have other items to take later on. Next, Mr. Koumoutsakos has the floor.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to congratulate Ria for the excellent work done once again this year. For a very good report, balanced, and I would like to make a point here, Chairman, which I consider that this is very important. The high defence expenditure of an average of 3.5% to 4% of the GDP, in which Greece has been forced for decades now, is one of the main reasons for the extremely difficult economic situation that we are in Greece. It is clear, dear colleagues, that Greece is not suffering from a national masochism. We are not happy in spending billions and billions of euros in defence expenditures. Greece feels, thinks, and has every reason to believe that it faces a constant threat from the East. And these are words of our Minister of Defence. Besides, Turkey, with its policy of ongoing violations of international law and provocations in air and sea in the Aegean region, is continuously underlying the existence of these threats. For all these reasons, dear colleagues, and I would like as well to remind you of the recent threats to the Republic of Cyprus, the escalation with Israel, and in previous years the tensions with Syria and Iraq. It seems that militarization is becoming a feature of the foreign policy of Turkey. For all these reasons, we simply cannot ignore this situation. We have to send a clear message to the Greek people when, in this moment of enormous sacrifices, that the European Parliament is strongly discourages Turkey to continue this disrespect for international law, this provocation and this practice of tension and crisis in the Aegean Sea, forcing at the same time Greece to continue its excessive defence expenditure in such an unfavorable economic situation.
Well, thank you very much. Now, Mr. Papadopoulos, please. Mrs.
Microphone.
Antigona.
Microphone.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We keep saying that Cyprus is a problem on the path of Turkey towards European integration. Now, I think that's the wrong way round to be putting this. The fact is that Turkey needs to understand that it's got to do something, and Cyprus is not an obstacle on the path to membership. It's been a victim since 1974, since the invasion. Turkey is a threat to Cyprus, and they continue with illegal the sending of settlers to the north of the island. They continue to not do all they could in terms of cooperating and to finding determining the fate of missing persons and so on. I think that there is now the Ankara Protocol. It should be implemented, and the Turks should not simply be emitting threat to Cyprus. It seems to me that there is intergovernmental negotiation taking place. We have lost the microphone for the speaker. Oh, it's back again. Thank you very much. And I think that Turkey has obligations towards the European Union which they must deliver on now. Thank you very much. One moment, please.
Gracias, Presidente. En fin, yo quiero unirme a las felicitaciones a Ria Oomen, a la ponente, por su brillante trabajo.
Thank you, Chairman. I would like to thank the Rapporteur for the excellent work she's done as well, and she's also had to struggle with 500 amendments, but she's done so far very effectively. Very briefly, just one comment, and I'd like to ask for a clarification as well. The comment concerns Compromise Amendment 23, and it was specifically the point on the policy on visas. As I said to the Rapporteur via email recently, I think the way this attempt to converge visa policy between the EU and Turkey is rather ambiguous. It's not a question of reaching a convergence of policy here. It's a question of Turkey accepting the European Union acquis. This is all the more necessary. And, we should recall that a few years ago that the foreign minister of Turkey said it was going to take the visa right away from citizens of Syria, Sudan, and so on. Now, I think this compromise amendment is too ambiguous. On the other hand, we compromise 14, in which in brackets says one should not offend, shock, etc., any sector of the population. And then in this text it says, in accordance with the European Convention on Human Rights. I'd like to know if this text, in inverted commas, is exactly what it says in the Convention. I don't have the Convention up by heart, but is that in fact a proper quote?
Please. Thank you very much, President. Thank you to Mrs. Oomen-Ruijten, including for a long email yesterday, which I'm going to study and reply to later today. So my comments now reserve any later points also to my friend and colleague, Mr. Obiels, in his absence. I do welcome the compromise as it looks to make more positive our view on the I do notice that my amendments in relation to opening the competition and energy chapter from my amendment aren't in compromise too, so I hope they will either be included or voted as an addition. I thank her for her support for my amendment 215 on conscientious objection and on amendment 241, I believe it is, on trade unionists. However, on compromise 22, I agree with some of the points already made. On the KCK case, I'm afraid it does appear to me that there is mass arbitrary arrest and that people with no substantive charges against them are waiting horrendously long times in jail. And I don't feel that her compromise properly reflects my amendment in relation to that. She asked me to withdraw 397. I ask her to look again at the compromise because I think it's completely consistent to stand with Mr. Van Orden against terrorism, but also with Mr. Lambsdorff against abuse of human rights. These are not two alternatives, and that is brought to a clear case in this case. I welcome compromise 24 on foreign policy, but she hasn't in compromise 25 picked up my idea of mechanism. We're not simply asking for legislation on the implementation of the Convention Against Torture, but a mechanism to implement it. So I look again at that compromise, or again for a vote to be made, an additional point on that word mechanism to be in the voting list.
Thank you very much. Mr. Kreisel-Dorfmann, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I think that this report can make a contribution to resolving this long-standing problem between Turkey, the EU, and the member states, notably Cyprus. It's all about give and take. I don't think it's helpful to say that the EU hasn't delivered on its undertakings from 2004. The EU has done a great deal. The Ankara Protocol still hasn't been signed, and if the Turkish government thinks it can go back to keeping illegal colonizational policy, then, well, I would remind you of the illegal Israeli colonization policy of Palestine. It's something that we can't accept. Happy with the idea of opening chapters 23 and 24, but there has to be a quid pro quo, and simultaneously, so that we can get out of this revolving door. I hope that the current Turkish government will become more moderate, but because what we can't have is a country joining the EU but not willing to negotiate with a country that's already in the EU. I'm happy to support the idea of Turkish accession, but I mean, the EU and Turkey have to be on an equal footing. Everything else Mrs. Oomen-Ruijten said was fine.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to start by saying how important it is that the members of Turkish Parliament are coming here in Brussels on a regular basis, paying interest what is happening there. It is a parliamentary democracy, and more visitors coming from Ankara really helps to create much better atmosphere for the future there. What I want to say is a simple fact, that in July we are going to open 2 chapters in the case of Montenegro, 23 and 24. This is the new approach, new strategy, new strategic decision of European Commission. If something is in place for Macedonia, it has to be for all the candidate countries, for all those who are already negotiating or will start negotiations in the near future. We need to start with 23 and 24. 23 will allow us to tackle the most sensitive problems, and I believe that this is the best way to make a progress in the case of Turkey and our relations with Turkey, and to create much better atmosphere not just in Turkey but on Cyprus as well. It is about human rights, it is about media, it is about the situation in prisons, it is about the judicial reforms, it is about everything what is crucial for us for their accession towards and finally into the EU, if it is going to be possible. But the progress is needed. Again, 23 and 24 are magic words. Thank you very much. Now, Mr. Filori from the Commission, please.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Madam Rapporteur, distinguished members of this committee, allow me please first in the name of the Commission to congratulate Madam Rapporteur for a fair and balanced draft as it stands now. We consider that the findings reflect to a very large extent the assessment of the Commission done in our last yearly progress report. If you allow me, Mr. Chairman, I will limit my remarks to those amendments where the Commission is directly solicited. I understand that Compromise Amendment 5 contains a request to analyse the implementation of the 2010 constitutional amendments in our next 2012 progress reports. It goes without saying that we will do so as part of our task to follow up Turkey's compliance with the political criteria and to ensure that EU standards on democracy and fundamental rights are met. As for the request in Compromise Amendment 11 for a specific annex on our detailed findings on the Ergenekon case, let me just clarify, Mr. Chairman and distinguished members of the committee, that the task of the Commission is to monitor the functioning of the judiciary in the light of the relevant principles of the European Convention on Human Rights, including the right to liberty and security and the right to a fair trial. In short, the Commission does not look into the details of individual cases, but looks into the aspects of legality. And this issue features prominently in our annual progress reports, and it will be the case again in our forthcoming report on Turkey to be presented next autumn. In addition, be aware that we conduct also work through what we call peer reviews. And a peer review on the Turkish criminal justice system has been conducted in 2011. The experts' report is publicly available on the website of the EU delegation in Turkey, and I will be happy to convey this to you. A second peer review, this time focusing on legislation and practice of the so-called courts for serious crimes, those courts that try all cases Ergenekon, Sledgehammer, etc., has already been launched. This peer review is led by a judge of one of our member states, and once the report of this peer review has been finalized, it will be made public as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now Mr. Portman from the Cabinet of the High Representative, who is in charge of the EU-Turkey cooperation in foreign policy. Please, Mr. Portman.
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak and to welcome the Rapporteur's work and to say how pleased we are, especially with paragraph 36, addressing Turkey's strategic role and the potential synergies in EU-Turkey foreign policies. Turkey remains a key priority for the High Representative, and we've devoted in the ES considerable resource this year to our relationship with Turkey, both in light of the Arab Spring and also, of course, because it is a major element developing our foreign policy dialogue, a major element of the positive agenda. So we very much believe that the Parliament's work can give important encouragement to further reinforcing, coordinating and aligning Turkey's foreign policy with that of the European Union, and once again we welcome that positive reference in the report. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Mrs. Ruijten, you have the floor to round up.
Dank u zeer, voorzitter. Laat mij bij het laatste...
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for all of that. Let me begin right at the end there and just say a word of thanks to Mr. Portas and the EAS for the kind words. In our direction, we will try to make sure that we can proceed in a spirit of close cooperation. Secondly, and this is one for the Commission, Mr. Filori. I can well understand that it's an old ingrained response, a reflex response, a reflex reaction. The minute you're asked for something by the European Parliament, then the Commission will come along and say, well, it's got to be really give and take, and it's got to be a quid pro quo. I think that the Parliament is interested in cooperation, but of course we are master of our house when we're over here. I was happy, however, with the comments that this was a good, balanced report. Chairman, I think that the central point which was made by colleagues in the discussion can be summarised in this way. First of all, Turkey needs to be on good relations, on good terms with its neighbours. What I was saying at the very start was this. What I say on Cyprus is in line with the forthcoming presidency of Council, and this is a good, clear, constructive proposal. And I note that with one exception, Mr. Hatzigeorgiou, that did have support. And my question now is to Mr. Hatzigeorgiou. He made points, and I think that if you look through the report, you'll find it in the paragraph. Even in the first version, I did indeed make mention of the forthcoming presidency of Cyprus, of Council. I did talk about many persons, and I did talk about Famagusta. And my question is, surely that point that you've made has been covered. It's all very well plain to the gallery, but anyone who's read the text will know that those points have been well covered already. Now, secondly, and this is really one for Baroness Ludford, but for others in this area, we are fully aware that there are sensitivities, but there are sensitivities on both sides. And let's not forget, on one side you hear, it's quite right, Cyprus is a member of the European Union, Cyprus has got to be protected and defended. And then on the other side, there are those who say, we've got to make progress on the question of direct trade. Now my job as rapporteur is to be objective and simply describe what we need to do. And on the other side of that coin, of course, everyone has got to do what they can. So I've received those amendments. There is a whole basket of amendments on Cyprus, and I would recommend that you look again at the text. It's unchanged, it's robust, it's balanced, it's clear, and I think it's objective as well. So I make that in connection with a number of comments made around the room. Now, I was a little bit pained by comments made by comments made by my good friend, Mr. Francesco Milan Mon. He talked about the question of visa agreements by Turkey with third countries. Now, if Turkey does not do that in dialogue with the European Union, then of course that gives rise to problems. And Mr. Milan Mon is quite right when he says that. However, look at this from the other side of the medal, of the coin, and consider the fact that in the report we're saying that if there is readmission and the agreements on readmission have been signed, then there is visa liberalisation, or rather an agenda or a path in that direction, and we've got to discuss the details of that. And this is where some of the difficulties lie. And I think it's a question of striking a balance here. On one hand, you're asking the other side to do lots of things in order to align themselves with the European Union, but they're doing that at a time when you have not yourself not taken the key step towards visa liberalisation. And so there is a balance there that you have to, it's a fine line one is trying to tread. Now I apologise if the present wording has not really covered that point, but that is the balance I've been trying to strike. Chairman, the report focuses on the points which colleagues have been making in the discussion. The rule of law, which is central to the Copenhagen criteria, the rights of individuals and the rights of communities, collective rights and individual rights. This is the very heart of European cooperation. And this is exactly what we're expecting of Turkey through its reforms. I have placed a great emphasis on this in the report. However, we're doing that. We're asking Turkey to engage in reforms, to deliver reforms, to enshrine all of these things better in their legislation and in their lawmaking. And at the same time, we're talking about a human rights report with the European Commission. And the Commission and Council have not yet given their assessment of that. And I think that that is perhaps not the right sequence of events. We can certainly ask questions about human rights, and there are things which the Turks can be expected to do. But at the same time, we've got to look at chapters 23 and 24. That is what we are asking from them, of them, at the present time. And I think that's where I've struck a balance. Therefore, Mr. Chairman, I have listened very closely to what people have said. I have looked at the compromise amendments. But you know that when you are rapporteur, you're always nonetheless a member of a political group. But you're also the person who's got to ensure that the Parliament is able to fashion a majority and is able to send out a signal and a message to those who are engaged in negotiations. The message has got to be clear, it's got to be robust, it's got to be objective as well. It's got to be such that you can focus on where the difficulties reside, but also make sure that all the important issues are on the table. I, as your rapporteur, Chairman, have tried to do that, and I think that the broad outline of my recommendations now has the support of most colleagues. I look forward to the vote tomorrow in committee. I'm sure that this is going to be a positive result at the end of the day. Colleagues are still asking me to make changes, but can I just make the point that the compromise building process was long and protracted, and I think that we must not allow things to unravel. Colleagues will say my amendment has not been properly worked into the compromise. That may be the case, but it's not possible to be all things to all people in this kind of exercise. And I don't think I need to be too perfectionist when it comes to taking on board everything which everyone has said. Thank you very much.
Short intervention, please.
Very short. I'm sorry to ask for the floor again, Chairman. It just seems to me there could be a misunderstanding about visa liberalisation. If the EU offers visa liberalisation immigrating to Turkey. That is for Turkish nationals. It means that Turkish nationals would not need a visa to visit the EU, well, it would be Schengen. But they would still face passport controls at the external border. The visa-free travel also would not extend to anyone who travelled via Turkey, anyone who's not a Turkish national who travels via Turkey to the EU. So I don't really follow the fear that this would somehow exempt anyone who comes from Turkey from a visa. It doesn't. It would apply to, unless I know nothing about visas, and I think I know a little bit from the Libe Committee, and it would not be a free-for-all for anyone who did not require a visa to visit Turkey.
Yes. You made your point. It has been taken by others, and I'm sure that it will be discussed afterwards. Come on, will you open up another discussion? No? Okay, Mr. Howard. 30 seconds.
No, it's a genuine point of order not related to the previous point. I fully accept that Mrs. Oomen-Ruijten has to ignore some things and accept others in forming compromises. But you remember last year we had a huge problem in the vote that certain things were said to be covered that weren't, and I simply appealed to her and the Secretariat to make sure that where proposals' amendments are not covered or elements of them, that there is a vote on the voting list to enable that wording to be included additionally. And I do require your assurance. I do not require, I apologise, ask for your assurance on that.
Okay.
But I negotiated yesterday with Mr. Obiols, and we had the hope that also Mr. Howitt, who came later in and didn't hear what Mrs. Gomez said about it, so I hope that there will be a small discussion amongst them.
Okay, that's it.
I was here when Mrs. Gomez was here, just to put that right for the record.
My dear friends, let's stop it here and call it a day in this respect, and we should move on now to the report on Serbia. Yeah.